In this module, we're going to take up magical transmutation. We're in the context of property law and looking at real property and personal property, and I want to share with you two brief cases that show themselves to be rather clean examples of where the law is a little fuzzy sometimes, and there are real questions that intelligent people have and that courts have to decide about whether something is or isn't real property. So first, just as a matter of beginning, let's look at a manufactured home. You have a manufactured home and it's sitting on land. Well, that may be personal property. Or if it's permanently affixed and some other things are true, there's an intent for it to be real property, it's being treated as real property, that same manufactured house might be real property. So how do you know? So the first case we're going to look at, I think it's interesting, but it's kind of funny as well. You've all heard of an eviction. Well, a forcible detainer action in Texas is similar, but the real question there is who has the right to possess the property? And the defendant, the person who had not paid rent, defended himself in an interesting way. He did not go to the merits of the case. He didn't try to argue, Your Honor, I did pay rent. I paid rent every single month. I missed 1 month, but then I caught up, or I overpaid 1 month, and so I underpaid, or I haven't had this repair done, and the landlord is supposed to be repairing this, and so I held money back. It wasn't any kind of those arguments. The defendant just goes to the judge and says, Your Honor, maybe I'm not supposed to be here, maybe I am, but the forcible detainer action is not allowed against personal property. It's only for real property. And the judge agreed. And the question was, this was a manufactured home, and the defendant, the person who hadn't paid rent, allegedly, says, well, this is personal property, you can't use this action. And the judge agreed. So here is the stretch of text from the case you should take a look at. There's some legalese in here. There's a section number. You don't need to know any of this. I cited to it anyway, just in case you wanted to look it up. But here's what you need to know. A manufactured home is, by default, personal property. But there's an unless statement here. Unless a statement of ownership for the home issued under this particular section for the Occupations Code reflects that the owner has elected to treat the home as real property. So if they elect to treat it as real property, and then they follow some certain steps, they've got to file a certified copy of the statement of ownership in the property records for the county. But it's really about the owner making an election, a decision, having the intent to treat it that way. It's whatever the owner decides. If you want to treat it as real property, well then Texas law will allow you to treat it as real property. If you want to treat it as personal property, Texas law will allow you to treat it as personal property. So this is an interesting case. It is not one where you have a great strategy employed by the attorney. It's just simply, this is not that. You can't use this against personal property. And this home I live in, so maybe I paid rent, maybe I haven't paid rent, but you can't use this action. For this next case, I'd like to set it up this way. So imagine you and your spouse own a cabin in the hill country. You have some acreage, and you have a rather large creek that runs through it. You like to fly fish. You've got a pond. It's fun to go swimming, fishing. You just enjoy your time out in the woods with your family. You go a couple of times a month. You spend weeks there during the summertime. You really enjoy it, and you and your spouse would like to ensure that your 4 children can continue to enjoy this. And so you decide at some point to give your 4 children each 25%, a 1/4 undivided interest in this real property. You could do that. And then your children, as they got into their 20s and 30s and then had their own children, would be able to enjoy this property. And that would make you and your spouse happy. There's another way you could do it, though. You and your spouse, put this cabin and the other acreage into a partnership. You could form a partnership and put these real property assets into the partnership, and then you would take back from the partnership interest. So you and your spouse would now own intangible personal property. Intangible personal property, because you no longer own outright any real property, at least not at this ranch or cabin. You would only own this intangible personal property. Now, the practical effect is you could still go every other weekend to this cabin. You could still go in the summer to this cabin because you control the partnership and the partnership owns the real property. But legally there is a distinction and it matters. In this case, there was a Delaware company, and it was an insurance company, and it was doing business in Texas, and in the event that this sort of foreign entity was doing business in Texas and it owned interest in real property, there was a pretty substantial discount in the taxes that it had to pay. And so for several years in a row, this Delaware company said, oh, we own interest in this partnership, and this partnership runs wells and has mineral interest. Great, we'll take advantage of this tax discount. After a while, though, there was an audit performed, and the tax bill came back, ooh, you messed up on your taxes. You actually owe us almost $1.3 million in interest and penalties in the actual taxes that you owe us, because you don't actually own real property. You only own personal property. So the Delaware company filed a lawsuit, said, we don't think that's right, because it says interest in land, and we own an interest in land. But what the Delaware company didn't understand is what you and your spouse do understand, and what Texas law mandates as the framework for understanding how this works. So under Texas law, partnership interest, they are simply not real property. Partnership interest are personal property. And that's all this Delaware company owned, was partnership interest. And their argument was, wait, the partnership that we own an interest in, all they do is real property. They have mineral interest, they have wells, all they do is real property. So we have an interest in the real property. Maybe it's indirect. And the response was, no, that's not how it works. Any real property that's held by the partnership, let's assume that it's real property. No argument by the court. It is real property. But it's real property of the partnership. The partners, in this case an entity, but in the case of you and your family would be you and your spouse, the partners have no individual interest in the partnership property. Even though they may control it through the partnership, there is a legal distinction. And they were unsuccessful in this case. If you'd like to read all the facts, I've left the citation here for you. You can copy that and paste it into a search engine, and you should be able to find it and read it. The takeaway here, just remember that even though there's some pretty straightforward definitions for what is real property and what is personal property, that there is still some confusion, and even sophisticated business transactions, arguments, reading the law, interpretation, statutory language, tax law, it does matter. And so this is, even though it seems like a very basic area of law, you're probably not going to do a whole lot besides buy and sell real property. It does matter, and it matters every day of a business when you're tracking the inventory that you have to pay property tax on, or you're tracking the real property that you're buying and selling, and it's trying to get market value. It does matter, and these distinctions should help you as you make wise decisions as business leaders.